So after The Cure released their self-titled record in 2004, Robert Smith essentially broke up the band. He fired Roger O'Donnell and Perry Beaumonte, and he brought back Pearl Thompson, who had played on a lot of The Cure's great records like Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Disintegration, The Head on the Door, and Wish. So what this did is it reduced The Cure from being a quintet to a quartet. So The Cure didn't have an actual dedicated keyboardist at this time, which is kind of odd. And I don't know if Robert Smith has ever come out and stated the reasons why he felt the need to fire two of the members and rehire one old one, but I think I can probably guess why. Simply put, the band's lineup from about the mid-90s to the early 2000s was not particularly great. And I don't mean that in terms of talent, but in terms of just albums. The same lineup made Wild Mood Swings and then Blood Flowers, which is a record I freaking love, and then it made the Cure self-titled record. And so there's not really another way to say it other than that's not a particularly great string of records other than Blood Flowers. And so I have to wonder if that was the reason why Robert Smith felt the need to break up the band. But also, just more than that, Pearl Thompson is a great guitarist. Really, I think Pearl is most people's favorite Cure guitarist, and it's easy to see why. And so this four-piece lineup of the band existed for one album cycle, and they made 413 Dream, which we're talking about today. I'm gonna be real with you guys and say that 413 Dream is an okay record, but that's kind of my major problem with it, is that I see it as just okay, it's fine. Really, I see it as having the same problem that a lot of later era Metallica stuff does, specifically 72 Seasons, which is that whenever I hear the record, I feel like I'm listening to a band trying to imitate their younger selves. Just in the same way that there's nothing incredibly remarkable about 72 Seasons, I feel like there isn't really that much that's remarkable about 413 Dream. It's definitely a pop record through and through. There really isn't that much darkness on the album. There's a little bit of thought and reflection, but really I think for the most part, the tone of the songs is akin to what you would find on stuff like Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, or the aforementioned Wish. And really, I think that this record is kind of a sequel to Wish in a lot of ways. And I say that because of the way that the guitar is handled. Pearl Thompson is a great guitarist, and Robert Smith is also a great guitarist. And so I think that the both of them are just kind of soloing all throughout the entire album. And for the most part, I feel like the record can kind of be divided into two types of songs. The first type of song on this record is kind of slow and thoughtful and reflective and dreamy. I'm talking about tracks like Underneath the Stars or Siren Song. I feel like The Only One fits into this, and This Here and Now With You also fits into this. These are songs that kind of live up to the album title of it being a dream. It's beautiful. And then most, not all, but most of the other songs are more rock and roll. And this is really where the Wish comparison comes in. Songs like Freak Show or The Real Snow White or Sleep When I'm Dead really kind of have this Guitar Hero style feel to them. And I think it's important to keep in mind some of the backstory with this album, because this is not the album that Robert Smith necessarily wanted to come out. Originally, he and the band had this concept that they would be making a double album. They wanted it to be over 2 hours long, and they wanted one disc that was going to be more dreamy and happy and upbeat, and then they would have a second disc that was going to be darker and gloomy and gothic. But that didn't really happen, and the reason why is because the record label was like, hey, we can't do this. And it sounds like at one point Robert Smith thought that he would be organizing a double disc version of the album, and then the record company would go through and pick out the songs they wanted and put them onto a single disc, but that's not what happened. Instead, Robert Smith just picked out some songs and put them out as a single disc because that's what the record people said. And so there are a lot of things that were left off the album, he says. A lot of slower, more somber, reflective tracks, a lot of instrumentals were left off the album. And in the Songs for a Lost World interviews, Robert Smith has talked about how disappointed he was in the way that that album kind of came out. Because again, the version of the album that we got was not necessarily his original vision. And the thing is that even if the record had been put out as a double disc, even if it had 26 songs like I think Robert Smith originally wanted, even if it had come out exactly the way that he had wanted it to, I don't know if it would have been a great Cure record. I worry that it would have had a lot of the same problems that I have with the album right now, particularly with the production and mixing of the album. Really, it feels like most of the tracks on the album are just too noisy for my ears. And noise is not necessarily a bad thing if that's what you're going for, but rather it has a lot of the same problems that I feel like their self-titled record has. Because I think that record is very noisy, and I think that you can tell that there are a lot of different things going on, but nothing fits together on that record. And I don't think it's quite as bad on this album, 413 Dream, as it is on their self-titled record. But certainly I think that there are a lot of tracks that just, where everything feels like it's clashing. One of my favorite songs is actually NY Trip, which didn't even make it onto the record. It was a B-side to a single they put out. And I think there's a really good song there, but it definitely feels like there's just a lot of stuff clashing. And again, that track really has an issue with just guitars going off all the time. It just feels like Robert Smith and Pearl Thompson are doing their best Jimi Hendrix impressions on this album. And that can be fun if it's the focus, but I feel like too often the guitars are actually distracting from the song. And so that's kind of the thing, is that if I don't like the production on this, then who's to say I would like the production any better on the more slower, somber instrumental pieces. And really, this album just feels like it doesn't have a ton going for it. It really does kind of feel like it's just another Cure record. And I don't like that, you know, because I think that every Cure record has a special identity. And again, I don't think this record is bad. I think it's just kind of boring. I actually like a lot of the tracks on here that most people don't like. I really like Freak Show a lot because it strikes me as a silly track, and it kind of reminds me of Hot 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 from Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. You gotta say every single name 3 times in order to make it stick. But I really like Freak Show, and it's one of those rare moments on the album where I feel like the guitars actually work. Underneath the Stars is a song that a lot of people love. A lot of people consider it to be like the standout track on the album, and it's the opener. Honestly though, I'm not particularly fond of it. It did start off originally as a Wish demo. Ooh Sound, I believe is how it's said. Again, it's one of the more dreamy tracks on the album. It's something close to Plainsong, or at least that's what I thought of, is that it's trying to be this album's version of Plainsong. But again, I don't particularly love it. Sleep When I'm Dead originated as a Head on the Door demo, and honestly, again, most people don't like it. I think it's pretty good. I like it. The only song from this album that actually gets played live somewhat regularly at this point in time is The Hungry Ghost. And I think it's one of the best songs on the record, and a lot of the reason why, if I'm being completely honest, is because of Robert Smith's choice of lyrics. This is really an issue that the band have had since Wish, but they write about a lot of the same things. And I feel like this is the album where it's most egregious. Most of the songs are about relationships or being in love or falling out of love. Or there are a couple songs like It's Over where Robert Smith is basically talking about not feeling like himself. And that song does have some cool lyrics that are kind of interesting. But for the most part, a lot of it is stuff we've seen before, but not The Hungry Ghost. The Hungry Ghost is basically a song railing against consumerism. It's a song, simply put, its message is just that focusing on what is big and bright and brand new will distract you from actual living and actual life. And I think that sometimes a message like that can come off as preachy or boring, but at least in this song, I don't think it does. And he points out how so often society or the world or whatever you want to call it, so often people are just focused on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Robert Smith asks the question, is this the price we pay for happiness? And I like this song, but I think that it's just because of that, because the lyrics really work for me. It's one of the few thoughtful and reflective tracks on this record, because certainly this album has more in common with their 80s pop records than it does any of their gothic work. And again, I mentioned that this album is kind of a successor to Wish, but even Wish had songs like Apart or Trust, songs that were kind of sad and thoughtful. From the Edge of the Deep Green Sea was on Wish, and that's one of the best songs The Cure ever wrote. Or you have A Letter to Elise, To Wish Impossible Things. And I wonder if that's part of the problem with this record, is that so much of it just feels kind of dreamy and so much of it feels happy and upbeat and joyous. And so I do have to wonder how much better the album would have been if it had been Robert Smith's original concept, or maybe it would have been worse, honestly. As I'm saying, I think my biggest problem with this album is just the fact that it doesn't do enough to separate itself and to make it a unique Cure record. It's a decent album. I have gripes with it, but honestly, I mean, it's a Cure record, you know? That's what I can say about it. It is one of the Cure records of all time, certainly. It's just kind of sad to me because it feels like this is the point where the Cure weren't experimenting or weren't trying anything new, and they just kind of made a perfectly content, mediocre record. And again, there's decent stuff on here, but for the most part, I'm kind of apathetic towards a lot of this record. And so I know this album has some fans, and again, there are some really good songs on here, but I'm doing this video because yesterday, whenever I was listening to this album, I just found myself thinking, like, I don't want to listen to this anymore. And so that's not a good sign. So far as rankings go, I think that this is my least favorite Cure album other than Wild Mood Swings, because again, this record does have some decent tracks on there, but it just feels very complacent. And it does have moments that are interesting, like the Scream, for instance. And I really love a lot of Robert Smith's vocal performances on this because he really leans into the craziness and the silliness that a lot of his other stuff has had. But all in all, this is just not a record I love. And so boom, it's at the very bottom, except for Wild Mood Swings, which I consider to be the worst Cure record. There's an EP called Hypnagogic States that was put out in 2008. It was a remix EP. Robert Smith just grabbed a bunch of like emo artists and had them remix songs. I don't know why, but Gerard Way and Julian Kay did a track together. I like that one, but really my favorite one is the one that Fall Out Boy remixed. They remixed The Perfect Boy, which is a track that I think is okay. It's okay, it's whatever, but they remixed it, and so it essentially sounds like a Fall Out Boy song, but with electronic elements instead of guitar. And I really like it a lot, actually, but also I love Fall Out Boy. So what happened after this album came out? The band toured it, and the very next year, Pearl Thompson quit the band. Robert Smith has called this the most acrimonious split of the band ever, and judging by the fact that 3 of the 4 people are still in the band to this day, I'm going to go ahead and say that Robert and Pearl probably something happened there. And so shortly after this, Roger O'Donnell rejoined the band, and The Cure just played shows for like 15 years straight. Like, seriously, like, that's what happened. Like, seriously, I'm barely exaggerating. Robert Smith did have some guest performances. He did have a solo song that was on the Alice in Wonderland soundtrack. I don't particularly love it, but if you like 413 Dream, you might dig it. He did that song with Crystal Castles, which I think is freaking great. But really, the band just kind of played their old stuff. They did the Reflection shows where they played Three Imaginary Boys, 17 Seconds, and Faith back to back to back, along with a bunch of B-sides. They headlined a bunch of festivals, and they went on tour, and they just played everywhere, and they just kept on playing live, basically. And so from the period of 2008 to 2019, there really isn't much to say about The Cure. Arguably the most notable thing in their career happened during that time period, though, which was that was when I got into them. I got into The Cure in, like, 2014, 2013, something. And so obviously that is the most important date, was whenever I first listened to Disintegration. And I'm sure Robert Smith would agree with me if you asked him. He would go, "Hey Robert, what's the most important date in the band's history?" And he would go, "Oh, it was whenever Noel got into the band." And that's Australian, that's not right. Anyways, I got into the band during that period. But it's kind of weird to look at a band's history and just say, oh yeah, over the course of 11 years, nothing happened. But really, no, they just played a bunch of live shows. They put out some live albums. I was listening to Festival 2011 the other day. I think it sucks. I don't like it. The set list is good, but I feel like just as a live album, it doesn't pack a punch. And so I feel like the 2018 live albums, particularly the 40th anniversary show, I feel like that's a much better Cure live album. Throughout the years, Robert Smith has promised that we would hear the tracks that got left on the cutting room floor from these sessions. That has never happened. At one point he said he was going to release an album called 414 Scream that had all the darker tracks. That hasn't happened. The closest we got is that whenever he hosted the Meltdown Festival in 2018, the band did this really cool set, basically, where they played one song from each album going in order, and then they played one song from each album going in reverse order. But at the show, the band played 2 unreleased tracks. I believe both of these songs are from the 413 Dream sessions. Step Into the Light is kind of whatever, but It Can Never Be the Same is freaking phenomenal. It's certainly a great Cure track, and I know that it's one of the songs that was floated around for potentially being on Songs of the Lost World. Ultimately, it didn't make it on. Robert Smith has said that it will be on the next album after Songs of the Lost World. We'll see what happens. But that song's excellent. That song's great. There's another song, A Boy I Never Knew, which I believe was demoed for the self-titled sessions. It didn't make it onto that album, and it didn't make it onto 413 Dream, and Robert Smith, in a more recent interview, said that he's also considering that one to be on the next Cure record. We'll see. That one's really good, though. They performed that one live a few times. And really, going back to the 2018 Meltdown Festival, apparently that was kind of what kicked Robert Smith's butt into gear about recording a new album. Reflecting upon this period from 2008 to 2024, when Songs of Lost World was released, Robert Smith has said that he just didn't really feel the urge or the drive to make new music, and he was perfectly happy just playing songs from their back catalog because they have a very expansive back catalog. And so even though they were performing live throughout all this time, he never felt like they'd run out of stuff to play. But Meltdown wanted Robert Smith to curate that festival over in the UK, and so Robert Smith had to listen to a bunch of new music to figure out who all he should put on the festival. Nine Inch Nails was on there, Deftones was on there, it seemed really cool. I did not go, though I wish I could have. But he said that diving into new music really made him want to make music again. And so that was when he started hyping up a new album, and I guess this is kind of where we'll leave off for now. And so I'm sorry, I wish I had more to say about 413 Dream. I wish I liked it more, honestly. And I will see you next time when we talk about Songs of the Lost World. So thank you for watching. I'm very tired. I'm going to bed now. I think it's a little after midnight. But yeah, thank you. Have a nice night. Goodbye. It was when Noah got into the band. It was when Noah got into the band. It was when Noah got into the band. That sounds too posh. It was when Noah got into the band. It was when Noah got into the band. I don't know, I'm not very good at accents.